that are too tall, then it's property values declining, then it's the whole neighborhood going downhill. We have to nip this in the bud. She actually said nip this in the bud while pointing at roses. The irony was completely lost on her, but I caught it. What made Barbara's performance even more ridiculous was how she positioned herself as some kind of neighborhood savior, conducting a full educational seminar about property values and community standards. "This is how it starts," she proclaimed, gesturing dramatically at our innocent roses like they were the first sign of societal collapse. First, it's landscaping violations. Then it's parking problems. Then property values plummet and decent families start moving away. The three neighbors she gathered were nodding along, but I could see the discomfort in their eyes. They knew this was excessive, but Barbara had created an atmosphere where nobody wanted to be her next target. I later learned that Barbara's husband had left her the previous year, telling her she was impossible to live with, and that she controlled everything like a prison warden. Instead of dealing with her personal problems, Barbara had doubled down on controlling the only thing she had left.
Okay, let's talk about something I'm super passionate about. Right now it's sale week. I'm Chelsea. I'm a physician assistant. I am all for looking at preventative health measures.
Doubled down on controlling the only thing she had left, our neighborhood. The HOA had become her personal kingdom, and she wasn't about to let anyone challenge her authority, especially not over something as simple as roses that dared to grow 6 inches taller than her arbitrary rules allowed. Alice would have laughed if she'd been there, but she was away on another one of her mysterious training sessions. I should have just paid the fine and trimmed the roses. That would have been the smart thing to do. But something about Barbara's tone, about the way she was performing for her little audience, about the fact that she felt entitled to dictate what we could grow in our own yard, it just rubbed me the wrong way. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I marched outside to have a conversation with my neighbor about finding a reasonable solution. "Excuse me, Barbara," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and neighborly. "I got your notice about the roses. I was wondering if we could work something out, maybe a warning period or a different solution that doesn't involve a $500 fine." The other neighbors went quiet, sensing drama. Barbara turned to face me with a kind of smile that sharks probably use before they attack. "Mr. Davis," she said, using my last name like we were in some kind of formal business meeting, "the rules are very clear about vegetation height limits. There's nothing to work out. Either you comply with the regulations you agreed to when you moved into this community, or you face the consequences." That's when I realized this wasn't really about roses at all. Barbara had been the HOA president for 8 years, and according to the neighbors I'd talked to quietly, her husband had left her the previous year. Apparently, he'd told her she was impossible to live with and that she controlled everything like a prison warden. So instead of dealing with her personal problems, Barbara had doubled down on controlling the only thing she had left, their neighborhood. The HOA had become her personal kingdom, and she wasn't about to let anyone challenge her authority, especially not over something as simple as roses. The conversation ended with Barbara announcing loudly enough for the whole street to hear, "You have 72 hours, Mr. Davis. After that, additional fines will be assessed daily until compliance is achieved." She said it like she was some kind of government official issuing a court order. Then she turned on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving me standing there, feeling like I'd just been dressed down by a substitute teacher having a power trip. When Alice got home that evening, I told her about the whole Barbara situation. I expected her to be as frustrated as I was, maybe suggest we fight the fine or talk to other neighbors about Barbara's increasingly authoritarian behavior. Instead, Alice just looked at the notice, read it carefully, and said something that should have been my first clue about who I'd married. You know, in my work, they teach us never stop your enemy when they're making mistakes. I asked her what she meant, and she just smiled that mysterious smile of hers and said, "I wasn't ready to trust the process yet. I was angry and I wanted to do something about it. So the next morning, I went back outside and started trimming the roses myself. Not because I wanted to comply with Barbara's demands, but because I didn't want Alice to come home to this drama. As I was cutting away the beautiful growth Alice had worked so hard to cultivate, Barbara appeared on her front porch like she'd been watching and waiting for this exact moment. That's more like it," she called out across the street. "I'm glad to see you've decided to be reasonable about this." The satisfaction in her voice made my skin crawl. I realized then that this had never been about community standards or property values. This was about power, control, and Barbara's need to prove that she could make people bend to her will. As I bagged up the rose clippings that Alice would never see bloom, I made a mental note to have a serious conversation with my wife about exactly what kind of work she did that taught her about enemies and grave digging. Just flowers? But what if Barbara doesn't stop here? And what if there's something about Alice I still don't know? Type danger if you think Barbara is about to make her biggest mistake yet. The Rose incident was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Barbara turned our quiet neighborhood into her own personal surveillance state, and somehow, Alice and I had become her primary targets. It started small. Barbara would happen to be outside every time we came or went, always with that fake smile and a comment about keeping an eye on things for everyone's safety. Then I noticed she'd installed a new security camera on our porch, angled perfectly to capture our driveway and front door. The camera wasn't technically illegal, it was on her property after all, but the way she positioned it, the way she'd make a big show of checking it whenever we walked by, the way she'd wave at it like she was hosting her own reality show, it was clearly meant to intimidate us. She's documenting everything, I told Alice one evening after catching Barbara photographing our garbage cans with her phone. She took pictures of our trash pickup because apparently one of the bags was sitting 2 inches outside the designated collection area. Alice just nodded calmly and said, "Let her document away. The more evidence she creates of her own behavior, the better." Again, with the cryptic responses. My wife worked in security consulting, which I assumed meant corporate stuff. Checking office buildings for vulnerabilities, maybe training people on workplace safety protocols. But the way she talked about Barbara's surveillance, like she was analyzing a tactical situation rather than dealing with a nosy neighbor, made me wonder exactly what kind of security consulting she did. The daily harassment escalated quickly. Barbara started calling our HOA violation hotline. Yes, she created a hotline for reporting violations about increasingly ridiculous infractions. Our car was parked 1 inch over the invisible line that separated our driveway from the shared sidewalk space. Our porch light was apparently too bright and created light pollution that disturbed the natural ambiance of the community. The wind chimes Alice had hung by our front door were creating excessive noise during quiet hours, even though quiet hours were only supposed to be after 10 p.m., and Barbara was calling in complaints at 3 in the afternoon. Each complaint came with a formal notice, a fine, and Barbara's personal commentary about maintaining the standards that make our community desirable. The fines weren't huge individually, $25 here, $50 there, but they were adding up fast, and more importantly, they were driving me absolutely insane. Every day brought a new notice taped to our door, a new reason why our perfectly normal suburban life was somehow violating the community standards that Barbara had apparently appointed herself to enforce. She put up a camera watching our house. I finally exploded one evening after finding yet another violation notice, this one for improper positioning of recycling containers. "Alice, don't you feel threatened by this? She's stalking us, documenting our every move, creating violations out of thin air just to harass us. This has to stop." I was pacing around our living room, waving the latest fine in the air like evidence in a courtroom drama. Alice looked up from her laptop, where she'd been working on something she wouldn't discuss, and gave me that calm, measured look that I was starting to recognize meant she knew something I didn't. "You know, in my work they teach us, never stop your enemy when they're making mistakes," she said, echoing what she'd told me during the Rose incident. "What kind of work?" I asked, suddenly realizing that in 2 years of marriage, Alice had never really explained exactly what her job entailed beyond security consulting.
Knock, knock. Hi there. I'd love to show you what a K-12 powered school is really like.
Consulting. Security work, she said, which wasn't really an answer at all. I help organizations identify threats and neutralize them before they become serious problems. Barbara is making herself into a very serious problem, but she's also creating a very clear harassment that's going to be useful later. The way she said neutralize threats made me pause. That didn't sound like typical corporate security consulting language. That sounded like something more federal. Before I could ask more questions, Alice announced that she had to go away for another training session. "I have to go to a work training for 3 days, she said, already moving toward the bedroom to pack. "Again?" I asked, frustrated. "How many times this year?" It felt like Alice was always traveling for work, always attending some training course or conference that she couldn't really discuss. "This will be the last one," she said, and something about the way she said it made me think she meant it. While Alice was packing, Barbara's harassment reached new levels of absurdity. She began taking evening security walks around the neighborhood, always making sure to pause extra long in front of our house to take notes on a clipboard. She started timing our morning routine, documenting when we left for work, when we came home, and when we turned our lights on and off. It was like living under surveillance by someone who'd watched too many police procedurals and decided to start their own investigation. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when I found Barbara in our front yard, measuring our grass height with an actual ruler. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "but what exactly are you doing in my yard?" She looked up with that same fake smile and held up her ruler like it was some kind of official government instrument test ensuring compliance with the lawn maintenance standards outlined in Section 12 of the HOA covenant. "Your grass appears to be 3/4 of an inch above the maximum allowable height." I stared at this woman, kneeling in my front yard with a ruler, measuring grass like she was conducting a scientific experiment, and I realized that Barbara had crossed a line from annoying neighbor into something approaching harassment. "Barbara, you need to get off my property, now!" She stood up, brushed the dirt off her knees, and gave me a look that was pure condescension. "Mr. Davis, I'm conducting official HOA business as outlined in the community guidelines you agreed to follow. I have every right to inspect common areas for compliance violations." "This isn't a common area," I said, feeling my anger rising. "This is my front yard, private property." Barbara just smiled wider and tapped her clipboard with her pen. "Actually, according to the covenant you signed, the first 6 feet of your front yard falls under community oversight for aesthetic compliance purposes. I suggest you review your paperwork more carefully." She was right, technically, but the fact that she had the covenant memorized well enough to quote property line specifications was deeply unsettling. After Barbara left, I called Alice to tell her about the grass measuring incident. I expected sympathy, maybe some advice on how to deal with an increasingly unhinged neighbor. Instead, Alice went quiet for a long moment, then said something that should have told me everything I needed to know about who I'd married. "If this goes too far, I might have to leave. Not we might have to move, but I might have to leave." Like she was talking about disappearing rather than relocating. That night, I lay awake thinking about Alice's words and trying to piece together the puzzle of my wife's career. Security consulting could mean a lot of things, but the way Alice handled conflict, the way she talked about threats and neutralization, the way she seemed to be analyzing Barbara's behavior rather than just being frustrated by it, none of that felt like typical corporate security work. I started remembering details I'd previously ignored, the way Alice never discussed specific clients, how her training sessions always seemed to be at undisclosed locations, why she carried herself with the kind of confidence that suggested she dealt with much more serious problems than neighborhood disputes. Most telling was how calm she remained under pressure, like someone had been trained to handle crisis situations that made HOA drama look like child's play. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my wife's job involved a lot more than checking office buildings for security vulnerabilities. Every time I tried to ask direct questions, Alice would deflect with that mysterious smile and change the subject, leaving me with more questions than answers about who I'd actually married. What's inside Alice's locked black bag? And why do I have this feeling Barbara is about to discover something she's not ready for? What do you think Alice really does for work? Drop your theories below. The truth might shock you more than you think. Stay tuned to Echo Stories for the answer. Alice came back from her 3-day training on a Friday afternoon, and I immediately knew something was different. She pulled into our driveway in her usual car, but she was carrying a large black bag I'd never seen before. Something hard-sided and professional looking, with multiple locks and what appeared to be federal transportation stickers on the side. When I asked her about it, she just said it was work equipment and that she needed to maintain certain certifications. The bag went straight into our bedroom closet, but not before I caught a glimpse of some very official-looking paperwork attached to the outside. Forms with government letterheads and serial numbers, the kind of documentation that suggested whatever was inside wasn't just regular security consulting equipment. Alice seemed more serious than usual, too, like the training had reminded her of something important she'd temporarily forgotten about. Barbara, of course, was watching from her front porch when Alice arrived home. I saw the curtains twitch in her living room window as Alice carried the mysterious bag from the car to our front door.
Pursue the other driver after a car accident.